Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers in the room. Happy Mother's Day. Hope you have a great day. It's May 12th, and on this date in history, on this date in 1789, William Wilberforce made his first abolitionist speech in Parliament. He later was to go on and lead to the abolition of the slave trade in England. Although it's one of those interesting ironies of history that even though the English never allowed slavery per se, they had no problem with facilitating it in other countries. There was not slavery in England per se, although there was in the English colonies. There was this sort of, this is kind of one of the distinctions. It's like, well, you allow us this, but kind of one of the reasons why the Americans, the colonists, thought they were independent was because there's so many differences between how it was run. But England was a very big contributor to the slave trade. They had this whole triangular thing where they would go and get slaves and then get sugar and slaves and rum, and there was a kind of I forget the order it went in, sort of thing. But William Wilberforce was one of the great leaders in England against that. There's a movie, I forgot what it's called, where it kind of documents his fight against the slave trade. Also in 1789, a group of Revolutionary War soldiers in New York City created the Society of St. Tammany Hall to get together and talk about being in the Revolutionary War, famous, American patriots and all that kind of stuff. And within about 50 years, the members of the Order Society of St. Tammany Hall had infiltrated all of the levels of government at an extremely corrupt level, to the point of where in New York, when you start talking about corrupt politics and corruption in the political system, you refer to it as a Tammany Hall style politics. Sort of like when in Chicago we talk about the machine. We talk about the machine politics or the dailies kind of thing. Well, in New York, you talk about Tammany Hall kind of thing. But it was started as a Revolutionary War soldiers kind of thing. So 3 years later, in 1792, William Carey published an inquiry into the obligations of Christians to use means for the conversion of the heathens. They were pithy in their titles back in the day. But William Carey, many of you may remember him as often referred to as the father of modern missions. And this was the pamphlet that kind of set the groundwork. And that kind of took the world, the Christian world, by storm. And within a couple of years, you started having mission societies and things like that kind of up. But that came out on this date in 1792. In 1937, George VI becomes the King of England. Yay! George VI. He took over from his brother, Edward VIII, who had abdicated to marry Wallis Simpson. As you may recall the story, I'm not suggesting anybody actually remembers that, but George VI is the current King of England's grandfather. So his daughter was Elizabeth, and Elizabeth's son is Charles, the current King of England. In 1970, 1970, for the baseball fans in the room, today was the day in 1970 that Ernie Banks hit number 500. Ernie Banks was a childhood hero of mine. Always wanted to be Ernie Banks. And when you went to see the Cubs play, you always wanted to see Ernie Banks. But it was on this date in 1970 that he hit number 500. And finally, today is Yogi Berra's birthday. So he would have been 99 years old today. He has since passed away. Okay, we are coming to the end of 2 Corinthians. I know, it's so sad. We are coming to the end of 2 Corinthians. In fact, after today, we will have one more session. Okay, and then we will be done with 2 Corinthians. All right? Yes, I'm getting there. Yeah. So I will not be here next week. Enrique will be here, so who knows, maybe the attendance will double. But Enrique will be here next week. I've got a niece that's wants to get married. Why? Yeah, I know. But she wants to get married, and she wants to have a She insists on doing it in Minnesota where she lives. It's like, you were born and raised here. You could come down here and it would be real convenient for us. But so we're going to be driving up to Minnesota to, apparently all of my siblings will be there and my mom will be there. So it's like, all right. Yeah. So we need to make an appearance. Because they'll talk about me if they're not, right? Isn't that how it goes? So then the week after that, will be our last week in 2 Corinthians. And we're going to cover 12 and 13. And then the week after that, I believe, there's no ABF. And then the week after that, we start the summer series, which is going to be in the big room. And that's, I don't know, the local outreach committee and that kind of stuff. So when we come back in the fall, the goal is to talk about Samuel, the book of Samuel, parts 1 and 2, which is a really interesting book. There's some really fun little stories that we all know, and there's a lot of fun little stories that we seem to have conveniently forgot. And we'll be talking about some of them when we get there. So 2 Corinthians 11, going back, 10 through 13 is looking, and I think 10 through 13 is looking at the future. Paul is kind of reiterating a lot of his arguments, reiterating a lot of his points to say, okay, in the future, because you remember there was a problem, and I think this situation was that there was an offering that had been promised that for whatever reason the Corinthians weren't delivering on. And so Paul is saying, listen, you guys need to remember here, you need to do this, you need to pony up with the money kind of thing. And he sends Titus. Titus goes over there, everything gets straightened out. And then Paul's like in a really good mood. He says, okay, here's why you need to settle on this offering. And you remember, because it comes up today, it'll come up today, one of his arguments in chapters 8 and 9 was that the Macedonian church is much poorer than you, in much more dire, even more dire financial straits than you might be. And they managed to come up with a very generous offering. And so you should too. So keep in mind that distinction that Paul makes in chapters 8 and 9 between the financial condition of the Macedonian church and the Corinthian church. Okay, so it seems pretty clear to me that the Macedonian church is a far less affluent church than the Corinthian church is. So Paul talks in chapter 10, we talked about Paul defending his ministry again. And now he says in chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, I hope you will put up with me in a little bit of foolishness, which is a great opening line for a chapter or an argument. Okay, let's put up with a little foolishness here. And actually I think what Paul is doing here, is saying, look, let's just suppose this is true. If this were true, he's kind of saying, let's say, for sake of discussion, that the arguments of the people who have come into the church are true. And then goes on from there. Let's say for sake of discussion, kind of like as I understand it, for the Englishists in the room, his entire thing is in the subjunctive sense. Subjunctive mood. Is it the subjunctive mood, right? The subjunctive mood. It's not necessarily true, but it's like, suppose it were true. If that were true, if what the people who have objected and caused trouble, if their criteria are correct about what matters, then let's discuss that. Let's look at it from that point of view. Okay? Suppose, and perhaps you've had that kind of argument where somebody says, well, blah, blah, blah. You go, well, okay, if that were true, you're still wrong, kind of thing. Or you still should have this particular approach. And so I think that's when Paul talks about foolishness, I think that's kind of the gist that he's getting into. And we'll see how that works out. Yes, please put up with me. This is actually when we got married, we shared Bible verses with each other. And this is the Bible verse I shared with Debbie. See, it's actually engraved in her ring, where it says, I hope you will put up with me in a little foolishness. Yes, please put up with me, kind of thing. But verse 2, that's not true. Verse 2, I am jealous for you with a godly jealousy. I promise you to one husband, to Christ, so that I might present you as a pure virgin to him. But I am afraid that just as Eve was deceived by the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. So Paul is jealous about the church, which is to say he's still worried about them. Okay? He's still worried about them. And again, I think the analogy of looking at this as Paul thinking of as a parent of an adult child. That Paul, the pastor, the founder of this church, the evangelist, is thinking, oh, once I leave, I hope nobody can sway them. I hope nobody can. And it's kind of like when your kid comes in and your adult child. See, I couldn't teach this class this way to like parents of small children because it wouldn't resonate. But when your adult child, you hear that your adult child went somewhere or met with someone that is trouble, and you think, oh, kind of thing, I hope that doesn't, don't listen, and you want to stop and go, oh, you don't want to listen to that guy. You don't want to, you don't want to do that. Like my younger son was looking for roof estimates, and so I'm like kind of having to, he got his first roof estimate, which was about 10 times more than he thought it was going to be. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't want to go with your first roof. I'm like, don't, it's his roof, it's his house, it's his bank account that's going to pay for it. But, you're like, oh, don't do that. Or if you find out that your son or daughter, visited a Lutheran church or something, or a Presbyterian church, even worse, no, not the Presbyterians, anything but, kind of thing. My older son went and visited an Anglican church once and came back really talking about how great this Anglican church was. And actually, there's an Anglican church in Bolingbrook. Bolingbrook is that way. I should put like signs up on the, just so I can know what direction to point. Bolingbrook is that way. Chicago is that way. Sort of stuff. Canada is that way. Mexico is that way, kind of thing. But there's an Anglican church in Bolingbrook, and one of the associate pastors of that church is a sub at Bolingbrook High. He apparently the Anglicans don't pay that well, so.
Baptists don't either.
Yeah, that's true. But Paul's concern here, again, like I said, is that the church will be deceived and led astray. And he compares that, he compares these opponents of his to the serpents in the garden. And he thinks that, just like Eve was deceived, you're going to be deceived. Okay, and I'm going to just skip over the whole Eve in the garden thing for them here. Paul is just using that as an example. It's like, Eve was deceived, you're going to be deceived as well. I'm just worried that that's going to happen. By the serpent's cunning, your minds may somehow be led astray from your sincere and pure devotion to Christ. Verse 4, for if someone comes to you and preaches a Jesus other than the Jesus we preached, or if you receive a different spirit from the spirit you received, or a different gospel from the one you accepted, you put up with it easily enough. Okay? Paul's past experience is that the church gave in too quickly. Whatever they said, they didn't stop and say, wait a minute, is that true? Is that accurate? And sadly, the church is still kind of like that. A lot of us are. We don't, we talk about the Bereans, in Acts chapter 17. The Bereans went home and searched the scriptures to see if those things were true. And it's one of those things that, every pastor, and again, Pastor Jarrett and I have not had a conversation to this effect, so I don't know him well enough to say, but every other pastor I've ever met say, oh yeah, I want Bereans in my church. Oh yeah, I want people like that in my church. Until you come up and go, that verse you used was out of context. Then suddenly you're not that, that'll, how to make friends with a pastor is to go up, or a preacher is to go up afterwards and say, you took that verse out of context. Or that verse doesn't say what you thought it would say. That's, But Paul says they gave in too quickly to someone preaching a different gospel. Do we know what that was? Do we know exactly what it was that was so different that Paul's talking about? Yes, no, maybe? Does anybody want to guess? I give it a maybe. I should have put the YTB. Your teacher believes maybe. Most people believe that it's some form of Gnosticism, which was a very common religious philosophy at the time. This idea that there's a secret knowledge that can be gained, and once you get that secret knowledge, you're in like Flint, to use a phrase that clearly ages myself a bit. But whether that is specifically true or not, we don't really know. We just know that whatever it was that Paul preached to them and whatever they were believing are clearly different. So Paul returns at this point to defending his apostolic authority. Okay. Well, here, if someone comes to you and preaches a different gospel, you put up with it easily enough. Okay. Hold on a second. In 1 Corinthians 4, just make it go. This is one of those things that I wrote in the margin of my Bible to look at this verse, and then I forgot to say why. In 1 Corinthians 4, Paul says, in verse 6, chapter 4, verse 6, we talked about this when we went through 1 Corinthians. Now, brothers and sisters, I have applied these things to myself and Apollos for your benefit, so that you may learn from us the meaning of the saying, do not go beyond what is written. So perhaps that is talking about the idea of the Judaizers, the idea that people that were of the Jewish faith saying, well, yeah, Christ is the next step, but he's just another step in the Jewish process. That in order to walk with the Lord, you had to follow the Jewish law, and you had to accept Christ or be a Christ follower, kind of thing. But she says you gave it up easily enough. But he goes back to defending his authority here in verse 5. I do not think I am in the least inferior to those super apostles. Okay, so who are these guys? Super apostles. Okay, are these like the next Marvel guys? There's a couple of ideas on who he's referring to. One is that he's referring to whoever the leaders were that led the Corinthian church astray. Okay, those preaching the other gospel. That somehow or other they came in, and I doubt they would have identified themselves as super apostles. Now that is just a translation choice that the NIV made, because another way to translate that is just the eminent apostles. And so the other option is the original 11. Okay, Matthew, John, Thomas, Peter, those 12. Okay, which is much more likely, because in the one of the things about the New Testament is that the New Testament does not limit the number of apostles. In fact, it doesn't say that there are only going to be 12 apostles and never more than 12. Okay. In fact, I believe the last time I read that there are like 19 different people that are referred to as apostles in the New Testament. Not, they would talk about the 11 or the 12, and Paul certainly, said, "Oh, I'm an apostle." There's no question about Paul considering himself an apostle, And we've kind of take that, and there's a whole, I've forgotten the name of the book now, but there's a whole book written based on Ephesians 4:12, where it says Paul gave pastors, teachers, apostles, evangelists, and this particular author talks about, being an apostle just is someone who is sent. Someone who is sent. And so, like the 12 disciples, the 12 apostles were given the Great Commission, go into all the world and preach the gospel. They were sent. And so to a certain extent, today, when you look at missionaries, people who are missionaries, they are sent. They are sent out in order to deliver the gospel. They are fulfilling the apostolic office. So, and again, it's one of those interesting things. But so Paul never says that that there's only going to be 12. Okay, and when we talked about Acts, those of you who remember, they filled it. The apostles, the original 11, seemed to think that there should be a 12th, and they put a little, caveat. Okay, it had to be somebody that saw the Lord and walked with the Lord and all that. And so Matthias was chosen, and then we never hear from him again. Okay, but that's okay. We don't hear from a lot of the disciples either. Okay, we only actually hear about 4 or 5 of them. But Paul is talking about it. He says, I'm not inferior to these guys. I'm the same as these original 11. Me and Peter, we're like right as far as authority, as far as mission, as far as gospel accreditation. We are the same. But Paul points out here, I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. Okay, which is kind of his way of saying, I may not sound smart, but I really am. I know what I'm talking about. But again, once again, remember we talked about Paul's thorn in the flesh, and I said that some people have said that Paul didn't had a speaking impediment kind of thing. So here, once again, Paul is calling attention to the fact that he's not a great speaker. Okay, so it kind of goes back to one of the other arguments. You remember the story of Eutychus in Acts, the guy who falls asleep in the window and falls out? They said, well, one of the reasons why he fell asleep was because Paul wasn't that great a speaker, right? And so, and sometimes you'll hear people that are not great speakers that are really super smart. Okay, I can think of a couple of examples. I talked last week about, or 2 weeks ago, about Hunter Thompson. Another one is Sylvester Stallone. You know, the Rocky. If you ever hear him in an interview where he really starts talking about, like, he wrote Rocky. He wrote the play. He wrote the script, and and several of the others, and he's written several. That he, and to listen to him talk about the craft, you have to get into like a more detailed kind of like a Charlie Rose sort of, or in the actor studio. He's really super smart. He just doesn't sound it. Arnold Schwarzenegger, another guy. Now, that may be just accent. Who knows? In German, he may sound like a genius. But, that's another guy that when we listen to him, you go, oh, wow, I can't, Joe Walsh, the guitarist for the Eagles. Because anybody, I know, nobody's going to admit knowing who Joe Walsh is. But he played guitar for the group the Eagles and the James Gang. And when you listen to this guy talk, if you ever listen to this guy talk, he sounds like he's perpetually drunk. But you get him into it because he used to sit in with Steve Dahl and Gary Meyer. You remember Steve and Gary? And they would get in these long conversations about record making and the details of record making. And the guy is super sharp. But you start listening to him, you think, man, this guy he's 3 sheets to the wind. But that's just how he sounds. That's just how he talks. And perhaps Paul was like that. His speaking style was something that just was not captivating. But he knew what he was talking about, and once he could get in your mind and get you to understand what he was talking about, you go, oh, this guy is super sharp. But I may indeed be untrained as a speaker, but I do have knowledge. Okay, I know what I'm talking about. Okay, we have made this perfectly clear to you in every way. Was it a sin for me to lower myself in order to elevate you by preaching the gospel to God of you free of charge? Again, we're back to this question about not taking support when he was in Corinth. Okay? In fact, the way Paul puts it, he says, I robbed other churches by receiving support from them so as to serve you. And when I was with you and needed something, I was not a burden to anyone. For the brothers who came from Macedonia supplied what I needed. I have kept myself from being a burden to you in any way and will continue to do so. Okay? And now, today, and to me, it still is not disconcerting, but it's like, why is this such a big issue? Why is it that this is quite, that he's harping on this again? Why are the Corinthians so upset with him for not taking their money? I don't know. I don't have a good explanation for that. The only thing, I read a book a few years ago called The Gospel of Trees. Has anybody read The Gospel of Trees? That's a great book. For a number of reasons, it's a great book. But it tells a story about a girl who grew up, I don't know, lived like from ages 5 to 15 or something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong here, in Haiti. And her father worked with a group that wanted to plant trees. But one of the side things in there, she talks about that they lived in a compound. They lived in a compound in where it was like fenced off. And her father didn't want to be a burden, and so he mowed his own lawn. And when he mowed his own lawn, there was a fence, and their place was next to this fence. And as he would mow their lawn, there would be Haitians on the other side of the fence, like asking him, "Why are you doing that? Why don't you hire one of us to do this? Why don't you let one of us do this?" Kind of thing. And so he's mowing his lawn thinking he's taking care of his stuff, and the Haitians are over there thinking, "Why don't you let us do that?" It's not quite the same, but it's as close as I can come to why these guys are so upset about Paul not taking their money. Maybe it was just that they really wanted to control Paul, and Paul wasn't going to be controlled. I don't know, but he's still on this question about that. In fact, the way Paul puts it is like, I robbed other churches to serve you. Okay, and the church that the money came from is apparently that church in Macedonia. Okay, now remember what we said about the church in Macedonia in chapters 8 and 9, is that this is a church that is far less affluent than you guys are. And so the perhaps the point that Paul is trying to make here is like, you guys have received so much more and have done so much less. Get with it, kind of thing. Okay? Did I get that right? We talked about this on the way up here. I don't know if you know this, but I clear everything with Debbie. Even the jokes. No, just kidding. No, she's like disclaiming that. But it's like, this church that is in want is what paid for your ministry. And you're obstructing me over this, that, or the other thing. Okay? So Paul again calls attention to his poor speaking skills. How in the eyes of the Corinthian church did Paul lower himself? And again, that is, I think it's getting back to that question of not taking their money, refusing to take their money. How that's lowering himself, I don't, because they argue a real apostle would have taken our money. A real apostle would have let the church support him. A real apostle would have done that. Okay. Paul says he robbed other churches for his support while he was there. In doing so, and this also evidences the fraudulent motives of his opponents. And I think he's trying to point this out, that, hey, guys, they're just out for your money. If the money dries up, they're going to be gone, is kind of the implication here. In so doing, Paul keeps himself from being a burden to the Corinthians. And why? As surely as the truth of God, Christ is in me, nobody in the regions of Achaia will stop the boasting of mine. The fact that I don't owe you anything. Okay, I am just there. The only reason I am there is because I love you guys. Okay, it isn't because it's a highly paid position for me, because you weren't paying me. Okay. Why? Because I do not love you? God knows I do. And I will keep on doing what I am doing in order to cut the ground from under those who want an opportunity to be considered equal with us in the things they boast about. Okay, so again, he's talking about these people that are going to come in or are coming in. For such people are false apostles, deceitful workers, masquerading as apostles of Christ. Okay, so Paul considers his opponents in Corinth to be false apostles, deceitful workers, and persons masquerading as apostles of Christ. Now, this is not the kind of language you would use to describe somebody that you want to go into partnership with. Okay? So Paul is not looking at these guys going, okay, this is just a minor difference of opinion. I mean, this is serious stuff to Paul. Okay? And no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light. It is not surprising then if his servants also masquerade as servants of righteousness. Their end will be what their actions deserve. Now it's interesting, this particular passage. Now here he's likening us. These guys are agents of Satan. Okay, these are agents of the devil. These are the evil one has sent them in. Okay, These are not people with the gospel of Christ. They did not meet Christ on the Damascus Road. These people are servants of Satan. I did put in here to compare to Isaiah 14. If you go way back, for those of you who have been with me for quite some time, in Isaiah 14, you have the story of the supposedly the fall of Satan in heaven. Lucifer, son of the morning star, how the fallen kind of thing. And people connect that verse with this verse and say that the Isaiah 14 is the story of the fall of Satan. It's because of the connection with this particular verse. I don't think that's a good connection, but it's just, so you can kind of see where I think Isaiah 14 is not talking about the fall of Satan. It's just talking about the fall of one of the Babylonian kings. We talked about that in Isaiah 14 when we talked about Isaiah. But be that as it may, theirs is similar to Satan, who masquerades as an angel of light. They're just masquerading. And again, all the time I was doing this, who here has seen the Phantom of the Opera? Anyone seen Phantom of the Opera? There's a song called Masquerade in there. There's also a song called Masquerade in not Phantom of the Opera, Jekyll and Hyde. No, the Facade. Same idea, but has anybody seen Jekyll and Hyde? No? So we're going to have, your final is going to have these Broadway references to it. You're going to have to identify which verse was Stan talking about when he made the reference to Jekyll and Hyde. But Paul's argument, and I'm going to get in here, because it's pretty self-explanatory once he gets in there. We don't need to overanalyze it, but Paul's argument is that whatever his opponents can boast about, he can do it better. Which leads me to another Broadway. Anybody want to guess which one that is? Annie, get your gun. Anything you can. Yeah, anything you can do, I can do better. I can do anything better than you, kind of thing. Paul's like, and again, remember he's in this foolish mode. He's like, okay, if you want to talk about their credentials in that way, Paul says, my credential for being an apostle is that I created this church, I founded this church, I brought the gospel to you, I'm here out of love, I didn't take anything from you. That should indicate my concern for you, my desire to see you succeed. That's all I need to use. That's all I need to evidence to you to prove my credibility. But if these other guys are coming in and saying, oh, I got this, this, and this, Paul said, all right, let's play that game. Let's compare. Let's match up and see who's got the better credentials. And this is when he starts rattling off. I repeat, let no one take me for a fool, but if you do, then tolerate me just as you would a fool, so that I may do a little boasting. In this self-confident boasting, I am not talking as the Lord would, but as a fool. Again, this is what he's thinking about these opponents in the church. Since many are boasting in the way the world does, I too will boast. All right, let's do this. Okay, there's again my guy that I follow on Instagram, the scholar of the Bible and religion, who's no friend of Orthodox Christianity, by the way. He's Mormon, actually. But he always says, okay, today we're going to watch a video about something. He plays a bit of the video where the video says, this is what we're going to do. And he goes back to the guy, and the guy says, all right, let's see it. And then he plays the gist of the video. And this is where Paul says, all right, let's see it. Let's see it. Let's compare. Let's line up credentials. You gladly put up with fools since you are so wise. In fact, you even put up with anyone who enslaves you or exploits you or takes advantage of you or puts airs or slaps you in the face. To my shame, I admit that we were too weak for that. Okay? Whatever anyone else dares to boast about, I am speaking as a fool, I also dare to boast about. Because I think Paul doesn't really want to go down this road, but it's like, okay, fine. Okay, are they Hebrews? And this is where we, in other words, the opponents have nothing on Paul. Okay? Are they Hebrews? So am I. Are they Israelites? So am I. Are they Abraham's descendants? So am I. Are they servants of Christ? I'm out of my mind to talk like this. Okay? to me, Paul is this is like saying, have you ever had this conversation and you're I can't believe I'm saying this, but I can't believe I have to have this discussion with you, kind of thing. Sometimes it's with your even with your adult kids or any kids, like I can't believe I'm having to have this conversation. Okay, so I was at a work event where we had our computers laid out, and we all had laptop computers, and we all had cords, and the cord to my computer was marked. It was identified. It had tape on it and had my name on it, right? So everybody collects up their stuff because it was in Chicago. I was the last one to go, and when I got ready to go, I realized that the cord to my computer was missing. So everybody was still kind of milling around. So I'm like, who's got my computer cord? Okay, who's got my computer cord? And this one guy who was relatively new to the company, and he didn't last very long, but he was relatively new to the company, he says, oh, I've got it. And all I could think of, I'm in front of this group we're all allegedly adults, and all I could think of was like, well, give it back. And I was like speechless. This guy's in his 50s. He picked up a cord that had my name on it. He knew he did because he knew he had it when I asked him for it. I'm like, why? Just give me my cord back. Why? And I'm like, why do I have to talk to a 50-year-old and say, don't take stuff that doesn't have your name on it? And I think to a certain extent, Paul is like, I can't believe I'm having to go this route. But okay, I will. I'll go this route. Okay? So, family tree, Hebrews, so am I. Israelites, so am I. What about work ethic? I am more. I have worked much harder. And then he starts talking about punishment. Prisoned more infrequently, been flogged more severely, and been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I have been constantly on the move. I have been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in danger from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at the sea, and in danger from false believers. I have labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. So you think about this. So Paul is like listing all of these physical things that has happened to him, all of these physical punishments and pain and suffering that he's gone through. And it's besides that, you're only one of the churches I'm worried about. Okay, because he's got all these other churches that he went to. Ephesus, okay, another place where he spent a long period of time. He may be in, I don't know, I can't remember where he is at the point here, but he could be in Rome when he's writing this. He's got the church at Rome. There's a church at Jerusalem. There's a church at Antioch. So besides all of these physical things that has happened to him, he's like, you're just one of my churches that I'm worried about. I got all that. Now, how does that compare to these guys that are showing up at your doorstep, wanting you to pay them to preach to them? Okay, so again, he's prisoned more infrequently, flogged more severely, exposed to death more and more, 39 stripes, received it 5 times, beaten with rods, pelted with stones, adventures at sea and in water. You remember when we went through Acts, we talked about Paul's, that scene, one of the scenes that makes me think that Paul was probably not the friendliest guy. As the ship was cracking up, Paul stands up and says to the people, you should have listened to me. How to make friends. You should have listened to me. But physical depredations, hunger and thirst. Besides everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the church. Who is weak and I do not feel weak? Who is led into sin and I do not inwardly burn? Okay? When your kids, those of you who have adult children, okay, when something bad happens to your kids or something that you think is bad happens to your kids, do you feel it? I mean, even if they're small, but it's like, you have no control. Do you feel it? Of course you do. Paul is like, you're just one church. Something bad happens to you, I feel it. Okay? If I must boast, I will boast of the things that show my weakness. The God and Father of the Lord Jesus, who is to be praised forever, knows that I am not lying. In Damascus, the governor under King Aretas had the city of Damascus guarded in order to arrest me, but I was lowered in a basket from a window in the wall and slipped through his hand. Okay? So again, he's just, that's that story from Acts. He goes to Damascus. The very first thing that happens to him, immediately he's converted and the king, and they slip him through. He's completely vulnerable. He has no insight, he has no friends, and yet the believers gathered around him and were able to rescue him. He said, that was not anything I did. The thing that matters to Paul, and we'll get into this as we finish up in chapter 12 next week, or next time. To Paul, the real boast is to boast what Christ has done through or despite your weakness. These other guys that come into pointing on strength, and Paul is saying, listen, my weakness proves that Christ is working through me. The situation in Damascus, that was the first event as a believer that happened to him. And it's been, I want to say it's been downhill ever since for Paul, but it's been pretty much the same for Paul ever since. All right, he's going to continue on in chapter 12, where he's going to talk about, again, his weakness, because, again, in chapter 12 is when we talk about his thorn in the flesh. And then we'll finish with some final warnings, and that'll be in 2 weeks, I believe. Okay. Any questions? We're going to run out and go to Aldi this afternoon. Is Aldi open today? Are they open on Sundays?
Regular hours, yeah.
Okay. So.
I'll be there.
So, all right, thank you very much. See you. Pardon me?
No, I'm not staff well tonight. I think they think we're not going to get people because of Mother's Day. I'm hoping it's true, because
You've got something. Well, there's always, every time I'm in Aldi, I'm always impressed that and I'm sure it happens, but I've never really seen anybody standing around. Maybe they run you guys ragged, kind of thing. But I've never seen people standing around, which is, I guess it's good. I don't know.
yeah, we're not staff for it that day. So
Which store do you work in?
I'll be down there. I know, yeah. So, but yeah, we've got like the self checkout. So
Oh, I don't like that.